So Blair, this is really what you do for a living. We've talked a lot about the fact that mergers and acquisitions were way up, came way down, and then we've talked about a pipeline. You've talked about in this program, pipeline coming. It's been coming for a while now. When is it actually going to get here?
So great question. Obviously, if you're an investment banker, you're pretty naturally optimistic. So we always think that things will be better. I would tell you this. We do see the shoots, and actually it's already happening. In January, for example, if you think about larger transactions, we've already had 4 transactions in the first 2 weeks, over $10 billion. You compare that to last year's entire first quarter, there was 5 transactions over $10 billion. So it is happening, 1. 2, the fact is there's an optimism in the C-suite that we have avoided a significant downturn, and in fact that we'll have a tailwind and some growth, and that's always a good environment in which to do M&A, and we're getting a sense of that strongly. 3, there's a pent-up demand. We haven't had an important M&A in 18 months. Last year was a $3 trillion market. That compares to an average the 5 years before that, $4 to $4.5 trillion. So there is this demand, David. And remember, companies are actually really good at thinking about inorganic activity, M&A activity, in a way that 20 years ago wouldn't have been the case. So it's such a core part of what they do that there's a little bit of makeup. And then you think about the financing markets. There's more liquidity, not perfect, but more. And what we see on financing, for example, on leverage deals, at this point you can get 5 to 5.5 times leverage. If you go back 6 months ago, it would have been in the 4s. So there's a lot of reason to think it is a good time. And the last thing I'd say is we're in an election year. And the dirty little secret is 20 out of the past 24 presidential elections, markets have done well and gone up in the last year.
Talk about the financing for a second. There are some people, particularly in private equity, who are saying if in fact the Fed cuts earlier rather than later, that will really stimulate mergers and acquisitions. Is that your experience? I mean, is it important whether they cut in March or they cut in July, and is it important how much they cut this year?
I'm not in that camp. I'm in the camp that wherever we end up at the end of the year, in terms of the rates, has been priced in. Whether it happens in March or happens in May, will have limited impact on my world. The trend will have a positive impact. The fact is, when rates get cut from the first rate cut to the final rate cut, if you look at the past 5 times this happened, markets have done very well. Okay, so, and that's what will be priced in. I think the bigger question is going to be valuation, number 1. After you've had such a run in the market, you have the obvious question, am I buying it at XYZ company at the right time or not? And the way you think through that, and how long will the process take from a signing to a close? That actually continues to be a big factor, as it should. So I think that as we find a level in the markets and things continue to settle out, it encourages both the buyer and the seller to say, okay, there's something that can be done here. But in general, I just back up and say the conversations that I'm having and my firm's having with senior leaders across different industries suggest that M&A feels like it'll be much more important for them in 24 than it was in 2023.
So in financial media, which doesn't necessarily make it so, but in financial media there's a lot of talk about private equity and having a lot of portfolio companies, the need for private equity to actually get some money into the hands of some of the people who have given their money. Is that an impetus right now to have more transactions done? I
think private equity will be a very strong driver in 2024. If you think about the years preceding 2023, it was basically 40% of the market. There is such a large group of companies that are looking for liquidity and coming from private equity that I do think it'll be a very active time. And again, that goes directly to the financing markets as well. The financing arena will be more liquid than it was last year. And we're seeing most of the private equity world think about being more active. And frankly, to their credit, they slowed down activity at a moment when they should. Last year it was much easier for a corporate to look at something and not think they had private equity competition. This year, when we see companies we're selling, the interest is both corporate, we're already seeing it, corporate and private equity.
How much of your business in merger and acquisition is driven by essentially the need to reform parts of a sector? I mean, I'm thinking of one that I come out of, media right now. There's a lot of pressure right now for some of the big media companies to really think about the cards they've got and how they deal with them and how they get rid of some, how they pick some up. How much of M&A is really driven by these big companies saying, you know, we got to really restructure?
Today, I think it's most of it. Progress, transformation is happening so quickly and is so disruptive that every company is saying, here's my portfolio today, but where's it going to be tomorrow? So even when you talked about your world, media. It used to be traditional media with 3 networks. Now it's traditional and non-traditional players. Apple, Google, Amazon are as active as Disney, Comcast, Paramount. Gaming, what is technology? It all becomes one industry. If I go across any industry, that is what we see. I look at the pharma world. The fact is, life sciences is one of the biggest areas out there. Why? Because we have such innovation going on in this country. So many companies you never heard of 5 years ago and never heard of that have become really important just 5 years later, that this becomes a window. When you think about R&D for a big pharma company, it's more interesting in many ways to buy than build. So I would say that every business is being challenged in ways it never was before, and it's causing CEOs, it's causing boards, it's causing seasoned leaders to constantly rethink their ideal portfolio, recognizing there is never an end-state portfolio anymore. It is always going to be evolving. And the good news is we have as talented and experienced a group of leaders as ever. So when a CEO undertakes M&A today, chances are strong that he or she is going to end up doing a good job and the right thing for the company, both strategically and financially.
All of which supports your view that 2024 looks like it'll be a lot stronger than 2023 in mergers and acquisitions. What does that say for Centerview Partners? Are you hiring? And if you are hiring, what sorts of people you're hiring? Because it looks very different than it did certainly 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, because of some innovation, not to speak of, for example, generative AI.
Boy, that's a great question. First of all, we are hiring, so anybody has a resume, let us know. We're always hiring. The skill set we look for is probably different than you would think. We want people who can think critically, who can analyze situations, who have judgment, have an ability to make difficult problems distilled into more simple problems. And it's less about whether you can make a great model. I do think when AI, over time, will replace some of the skill sets that we see traditionally done in STEM, coding, for example. I'm not sure that if I was, I'd be advising my kids that learning how to be great coders is going to matter in 10 years. What will matter is, do you have judgment? Do you have an ability to think critically, as I mentioned? And ask questions that need to be asked, that you can see situations of what am I missing? And I think that is a skill set that people are going to find is increasingly important. And you also the skill set that says, I'm going to have 3 careers. What do I need to know to have 3 careers over my professional span?